Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
I'm Malformed Malcontent.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Welcome to our sideshow act, ladies and gentlemen. Christa couldn't make it today. She's on vacation. She'll be back next week. So today we are joined by longtime friend of the show, the lovely Malformed Malcontent. And today, the Dark Carnival brings you a sideshow act. Just step this way down the alley into the back tent, and behold the dreadful and disturbing tale of Karen Greenlee, the Sacramento necrophile.
On December 17th, 1979, Karen Greenlee, an apprentice embalmer at the Memorial Lawn Mortuary in Sacramento, California, was driving the body of a 35-year-old man named John Mercury, who had died the week earlier, to a private burial in the mortuary's 1975 Cadillac hearse. But as she approached the funeral grounds, she suddenly whipped the hearse around and took off, speeding away.
4 days later, she was found comatose in Sierra County near Allegheny, having attempted suicide by ingesting 20 codeine pills. And in the casket was a 4.5-page long letter stating that she was a necrophiliac and confessing to having sex with up to 40 bodies of dead young men, saying it was an addiction. The letter was filled with remorse over her sexual desires. Karen saying,
"Why do I do it? Why? Why? Fear of love, relationships. No romance ever hurts like this. It's the pits. I'm a morgue rat. This is my rat hole, perhaps my grave."
Karen would later state,
"Everyone said necrophilia was wrong, so I must be doing something wrong. But the more people tried to convince me I was crazy, the more sure of my desires I became."
California in the 1970s. What a time. Necrophilia was not illegal in California at the time. It wouldn't be until September of 2004, a quarter of a century later, that then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor, would sign a bill making sex with a corpse a felony, punishable by 8 years in prison.
Necrophilia is defined by the American Psychiatric Association in their current edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, as, quote, "an other specified paraphilic disorder involving recurrent and intense sexual interest in corpses."
Necrophilia has been reported in history as far back as 484 BC, when Greek author Herodotus, I'm probably saying that wrong, but Herodotus said it had been a problem with the embalmers in Egypt.
King Herod of Judea was said to have kept the corpse of a beautiful maiden who denied his amorous overtures, preserved in honey so that he could make love with her corpse.
Amorous overtures. I'm a good writer, aren't I?
You are.
Poetry from ancient Peru depicts acts of necrophilia.
And according to criminologist Herschel Prinz, it was said that until the 19th century, if a betrothed girl in Central Europe died before her marriage day, the spouse could still carry out the ceremony by copulating with the body.
And back to our story. Well, Karen Greenlee survived her suicide attempt. And since, as we stated, necrophilia was not a crime in California, she was charged with stealing a hearse and interfering with a funeral. She pled guilty, was fined $255, and spent 11 days in jail.
Karen laid low for a few years, but in 1987 conducted an interview with Jim Morton for his infamous book, Apocalypse Culture.
Apocalypse Culture. It is such a classic, man. A total Gen X book that touched on everything from Charlie Manson to Anton LaVey to G.G. Allen. I love this book, man. It's like every edgy punker, pseudo-intellectual had a copy on their shelf back in the day. It's still in print from Feral Press. Hey, you read it? Old Malformed Malcontent?
Oh, we've talked about this before.
We did talk about it, didn't we? Yep. I got it right here.
Hell yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, for your ghoulish entertainment, Malformed Malcontent and I shall now recreate for your listening pleasure that famous interview. So, Karen, back during the trial, from what I read in the newspapers, it seemed like you got very little support.
No, none whatsoever. The newspapers were the worst. To this day, I still hate reporters. One of them even compared me to Richard Trenton Chase, the vampire killer. What support there was like family obligations. One of my brothers refused to have anything to do with me. He said, "I just want to remember her as she was." He came up to me later and apologized, but he still isn't comfortable around me. My older brother was more supportive, but even he had to ask, "How'd you do it?" Before the trial, I had a boyfriend who found out about it. He got mad and slapped me around. He said I wasn't even a woman and I could go fuck my dead bodies. I was surprised. He knew. Apparently a lot of people knew, and I don't know how they knew. With guys, they always felt I went for the bodies because I was hard up. And if I went to bed with them, then that would change me, and they would be the one who would give me such satisfaction I wouldn't need those old corpses anymore. I've run into that a lot. Sometimes I had guys come on to me just for that reason. The question I'm most often asked is, how does she do it? Yes, that's the question. People ask questions like that. Even people who seem pretty cool seem to have open minds. Then when you tell them, they say, "That's very interesting." Then don't want to have much to do with me. I don't mind telling people how I do it. It doesn't matter to me, but anyone adept sexually shouldn't have to ask. People have this misconception that there has to be penetration for sexual gratification, which is bull. The most sensitive part of a woman is the front area anyway, and that is what needs to be stimulated. Besides, there are different aspects of sexual expression. Touchy-feely, 69, even holding hands. That body is just lying there, but it has what it takes to make me happy. The cold, the aura of death, the smell of death, the funeral surrounding, it all contributes.
The smell of death?
Sure. I find the odor of death very erotic. There are death odors, and then there are death odors. Now, you get your body that's been floating in the bay for 2 weeks, or a burn victim that doesn't attract me much, but a freshly embalmed corpse is something else. There is also this attraction to blood. When you're on top of a body, it tends to purge blood out of its mouth while you're making passionate love. Well, you'd have to be there, I guess. Of course, with all the AIDS going around. That's the reason I haven't tried anything lately. I'm sure I'd have found a way to get into one of those funeral homes by now, but the group I find attractive, young men in their 20s, are the ones who are dying of AIDS.
Did you usually attend the funerals of your corpse lovers?
Yeah. It was convenient working in the funeral homes. I'd get to drive out to the cemetery with the family. I'd get to mourn right along with the family at the loss of a loved one. Except I was groaning in a little different tone. People can't really tell if you're grief-stricken or passion-stricken. I've had members of the families put their arms around me and say, "We're so glad you could come." Then you have to spin this big old yarn. "Yeah, I knew him in school. If the guy didn't have a girlfriend in life, they think you were, oh, she's the one."
You weren't in Sacramento at the time of the trial, were you?
No. I was working in a funeral home in another city and going to school at the same time. It's weird, but the day I got the telegram about the trial telling me to get in touch with my attorney, I went into the funeral home and was fired for things I had done at that funeral home. Somebody, I guess, got wise with me. I know I wasn't seen, but I think somebody just figured it out. Of course, they didn't know about Sacramento yet. They found out later. The same day, within 5 hours of each other, two totally different things caught up with me. I worked in that funeral home for almost a year. That's where I did a lot of my extracurricular activities. I had keys, so I'd slip back in after hours and spend all night there. The guy lived at the funeral home in an apartment downstairs. He drank, so he usually passed out, and he had a .357 Magnum under his pillow.
The guy that the court case was about.
John Mercury?
Yeah. I understand he was moved out of the cemetery after the trial?
That happened at the time I was breaking into this funeral home. There was a side room, one of those arrangement areas where they always have their case folders out. I read there was an exhumation order for John Mercury. Then I read something in the paper about it. His mother wanted the body exhumed, said she wouldn't bury her cat there. On the day he was supposed to be exhumed, I snuck out into a field across from where he was buried. I sat out in the field and watched them dig up the body and give him to this other mortician. They shipped him back to Michigan.
When did you first become aware of your necrophilia?
Oh, it's something I've been attracted to all my life. I used to hold funeral services for my pets when they died, had a little pet graveyard. I lived in a small town, and the fireman's barbecue was next door to the funeral home. To go to the bathroom, you had to use the facilities in the funeral home. I'd find any excuse I could to go to the bathroom. Then I'd take side trips and wander around the mortuary.
It didn't scare you like the other kids?
No, I loved it. I was real curious. I wandered those halls.
Do you miss working in funeral homes?
Yes, terribly. Even if I wasn't a necrophile, I like mortuary work. I enjoy embalming and everything. Except for obese people. The bodies I hated working on most were obese people. Especially if they'd been autopsied. Their guts would slide out on the floor and shit. And all this melty fat. Yuck!
You said something previously about the vampire killer, Richard Trenton Chase. He was from Sacramento also, wasn't he?
Yeah, the second funeral home I worked for. I wasn't working there at the time. Got the bodies of Chase's victims, a man and a woman and their child, so I could hear the gory details of what the bodies looked like. They were really butchered. They were disemboweled with shit stuffed in their mouths. Chase started by killing animals and drinking their blood, and when he wasn't satisfied with that, he graduated to people. He killed this couple, then kidnapped their child, killed it, and later threw it in a trash can. The mortician who embalmed the bodies said he hardly ever got queasy about anything, but he got sick when he saw those bodies.
Interesting. What's the weirdest case you've ever encountered?
There was this one kid who fell out of a car while his mother was making a turn, and she managed to run over his head. Another kid choked to death on a cigarette wrapper. Oh, one guy committed suicide by shooting himself in the head with a pellet rifle. He had to shoot himself several times, and it took him a while to die, but he finally succeeded. There was another guy I worked on. Oh, he was a transvestite who somehow strangled himself with his nylons. I don't think it was intentional. I think he was trying to achieve heightened orgasm through strangulation, and he ended up hanging himself. He wouldn't be the first to make that mistake.
How about the most unusual funeral?
One time, this bunch of religious fanatics held a funeral for one of their members. They didn't want her embalmed. They just wanted her dressed and in the casket. We didn't usually do that, but we decided to be nice and put her up in the stateroom. We were standing outside of that stateroom when we heard someone saying, "Rise in the name of Jesus." They were praying and slapping the body. They were talking in tongues, and that was weird.
There seems to be like a strong camaraderie between morticians, almost like a secret society.
Oh, very much so. Morticians are very tight with each other because most people won't have anything to do with them. I used to find if I went to a party, I'd always be introduced like, "This is Karen, she's a mortician." But they don't say, "Here's Karen, she's a secretary," or "She's a veterinary assistant." A lot of people are under the misconception that morticians are very straight, very somber. If they ever went back into the prep room and heard all the jokes that are cracked, it would blow that theory right out the window.
Did any of those morticians ever testify for or against you at the trial?
One funeral director testified on behalf of the funeral practices. He was asked how often necrophilia occurs. He said, "It's almost unheard of in this profession."
Oh, well, but that's a major lie, right?
Yes, definitely. Necrophilia is more prevalent than most people imagine. Funeral homes just don't report it. There was one place that I broke into, and I know they knew something was wrong. They actually caught me in the act and let me get away. At another place I was working, this guy came up to me and said, "Someone's been messing with the body. It looks like they were trying to fuck the body." I said, "Oh my goodness, really?" I think they figured it out later. I know they know now. One mortician I worked with used to like a trocar, a large hollow needle used to suction fluids from corpses, and push it up inside any male cadaver's dick. He'd say, "Oh, look, the corpse has got a boner." This guy was really weird. He looked like Larry of the Three Stooges. I think he had some necrophiliac tendencies. He'd get real upset if there weren't any female bodies to work on. He'd start pacing. I caught him one time in the prep room, and he said that he was just taking a pee in the hopper at the end of the table. He was just pulling up his pants when I walked in, and I said, "I won't tell if you don't."
You say you were once caught in the act of necrophilia once.
Yeah. I tried to kill myself and was living in a halfway house a couple of blocks up from this funeral home. I decided to go to the mausoleum and try to kill myself again. The mausoleum had a door connecting it to the mortuary. I was sitting in there, real depressed, when just for the hell of it, I decided to try running my driver's license along the edge of the door, and click, the door popped open. I couldn't believe it, so I tried it again, and the door popped open again. I went into the prep room, and there happened to be a body in there. I had me some fun, did my thing, and forgot all about killing myself. I told the folks at the halfway house that I stayed the night with friends. I went in there several times. Sometimes there were absolutely no bodies, so I turned around and snuck back out, and I usually went in the back door. About a week later, I snuck back into the funeral home. I was on the prep table having a good old time when all of a sudden I felt like there was somebody nearby. Next thing, I heard people walking down the hallway. I quietly jumped off the table and threw the sheet back over the body. My clothes were in quite a state of disarray, and I had blood on me and everything else, and it had been an autopsy case. There was a casket with the lid open in the side casket room, so I ran and I hid behind it. The casket was on a church truck, so they couldn't see me, but they could see my legs. It was a man and a woman. They were standing there saying, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" One of them said to the other, "You go get the gun and call the cops, and I'll stay down here." I knew I had only one chance then, so I busted out and ran. I knew the layout of the place, so I just ran down the hall and out the place and out of the cemetery. Now, at the time, I still had a friend who worked at the funeral home. He said, "Somebody broke into the funeral home. They know it was you." They put an alarm in after that. I think they called the police, but there were never any charges. I'm sure they didn't want the publicity. And that was the last time I got very close, except for I've broken into a few tombs.
Have you seen any changes in people's attitudes towards necrophilia?
Yeah. When I came out here, I noticed it. It's almost a fad. They're not really necrophiles, but pseudo-necrophiles, like a death cult. But there are probably a lot of people who would do it if they had the opportunity.
Oh, well, perhaps there is this vast network of necrophiles who, for lack of a forum, will never know of each other's existence.
Well, there's Layla Wendell's group, the American Association of Necrophiliac Research and Enlightenment, and they try to get some information out about it.
And it must be frustrating when people say, "We have to cure you," or "You've got to be more like us."
It is. For a while, I found myself thinking, yeah, this isn't normal. Why can't I be like other people? Why doesn't the same pair of shoes fit me just right? I went through all that personal hell and finally accepted myself and realized that's just me. That's my nature, and I might as well enjoy it. I'm miserable when I try to be something I'm not. And to a lot of these people who are putting me down have hang-ups worse than I have. Or they do things that might be considered questionable by their peers. I had a gay friend who, when he found out I was a necrophile, said, "You can go to hell for that."
All right, I gotta interrupt. I'm so sorry, but it's maybe obvious, but Murder Coaster would like to say that homosexuality is perfectly normal and legal, and necrophilia is an unnatural crime. And at the least, it is sex with a non-consensual partner. Unless, I guess, you have like a signed document by the person written out on the day they died, granting you consent to have sex with their corpse or something. I wonder if anyone's done that. I'd still see a lawyer either way.
Yeah.
On with the show.
Anyway. After 1979, when I was put on probation, part of the probation requirement was that I seek therapy. I had a really nice social worker. She was cool. Very non-judgmental. The more I talked to these people, the more I realized necrophilia makes sense for me. The reason I was having a problem with it was because I couldn't accept myself. I was still trying to live my life by other people's standards. To accept it was peace. These people who were always trying to change me only helped me get myself more in touch with my feelings. I used to go from the therapist's office to the funeral home. It didn't work, folks.
It didn't work, folks. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Malformed Malcontent, for coming on yet again.
Well, thank you for having me. I had a blast, as always.
Awesome. Thanks to Paranormal Coffee for sending us some great roasted beans. Good stuff. And we are going to leave you, ladies and gentlemen, with a song by the awesome horror surf rock band, Preacher Preachers. This is Haunted Swamp.